Okay, here's the third part.
But does that not mean, Jordan, that would you then reject any attempt?
We're listening to Jordan Peterson being interviewed by Russell Brand right here. The first two parts, about an hour each. Here comes the next.
To alter systems in favour of fairness, because it seems to me that the focus is on, like, and as it would be for a clinical psychologist, individual change. Now, part of my personal experience is without individual change, social change is sort of irrelevant, and many great gurus would say...
You answered it right then and there. It's
yes.
like, because I am concerned with inequality, say, and with social instability, and I've thought about it for a long time. I knew that the left-wing approaches tended to fail catastrophically. And the right wing, of course, isn't particularly concerned with inequality, so that's irrelevant.
The left wing fails, and the right wing don't care.
Yeah, that's right. That's fundamental.
So we need to.
The right wing does care. We don't listen to ourselves when we make and advance any kind of argument. We don't listen. Humans won't listen to arguments which win, especially arguments which will fix a problem which otherwise is not considered to be a problem. Which is why I object to the way that the question is set up. To say capitalism has clearly failed, as you haven't demonstrated that. You have not demonstrated that. The entirety of Brand's argument depends on this failed premise, this failed theory that capitalism doesn't work. We couldn't have this discussion. This discussion would not have occurred without capitalism. And capitalism didn't stop open source technology either, which allows this discussion to occur. Nobody needs to be paid using cash if you find the banks to be a problem, Mr. Brand. Nobody. I mean, don't tell me about what the right or the left hasn't come up with or hasn't understood. We intentionally hide the answers when we find them. Sometimes. Gentlemen, both of them. Both of them.
They also don't see the danger sufficiently. And the right wing also tends to think that the spoils go to who deserves them.
The Baptists certainly do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of true, but it's not completely true. So that's part.
I guess the Catholics too, to some degree.
Part of that.
No, because we're not all. Because of course, and what from a leftist perspective would be that we're not starting with from a level playing field.
Well, and the system isn't perfect at selecting.
This is why I think a spiritual solution, but something that is
theocratic,
beneath or beyond material, is the only way that true.
Beneath or beyond. It's beneath material existence. Oh, he needs to have his religious spiritualism beneath now, not transcendent, but beneath. You know why he needs to be beneath? Because he's literally using the God of the gaps. That's why. Because he knows quantum reality gives him more proof of what he needs, to what he wants. That his lovely little belief patterns will change bad to good, just like that. And his righteousness defines all evil. Just remember that.
Progress is likely to be achieved. I was thinking of this, something that you said before about, we were talking briefly about kindness and compassion, and it occurs to me, and this is, I'm sure, very simplistic, but the heroism itself, by which I mean sacrifice, the willingness to sacrifice yourself for a greater idea. What excites me about that idea, and I believe why the phenomena is so loaded, is if someone is willing to die for something, it's that they believe it's bigger than them, or in fact that their self is not the truest.
Because people have never been giving falsehood before dying. As long as they believe it's true, they'll still die for a false ideal, won't they? Wouldn't they? We could feed every person in North Korea. That's probably not the best way of putting that. We could take every person in North Korea, sit them down in front of a television screen, and tell them all the truth we want to, couldn't we, Russell? And that wouldn't make them right, or they might believe it and go out and act as if it were true, but it wouldn't make it true, would it? Not even if everybody in North Korea thought it were true.
Thing that there is something greater. If I will give my life for another person, it's almost an acknowledgement of oneness, the temporalness of the individual.
He needs his monotheism to work really badly, doesn't he?
Created self, and we all work so hard.
The surprising thing about the cult that he joined is it has no problem pretending that it speaks for all religions, but it tends to be divided up along denominational boundaries. So you'll find some groups which are belonging to a specific religion, but speaking as if it would accept members from all religions, which isn't true.
Achieve individuation, and I'm sure much of your work as a clinical psychologist is guiding people towards it. But for me, it's just a temporary resting place, because having had the kind of experiences of personal humiliation, annihilation, success, failure.
Personal humiliation where? Where? Where was your personal humiliation? Tell me this guy went to court. Tell me this guy went to jail.
Decimation, like, you know, all of these things.
Decimation. Tithing. Decimation, friends, means tithing. He had to give up a tenth. Oh.
But what I've been led to, and what I continue to struggle with, is how do I serve? How am I of service? How do I help?
I think that is the solution to the problem. It's like, I don't think
Yeah. Peterson won't have a problem with none of that.
the solution to the problem of inequality is sociological. I think it's psychological. I mean, partly what I'm...
Why? Because it's closer to essence? Because it's more essential? Or because
Why?
a society has to be a reflection of individual psyches or collective psyches? Why is it psychological?
I think the temptation towards resentment...
Why is it psychological, Mr. Made in the Image of God? Well, there you go. Let's dance around this all day long. Oh, frustrating.
and destruction that's associated with sociological approaches to inequality is too great, and that as a consequence, those movements tend inexorably to become corrupt and destructive. Because I think Orwell put his finger on it when he said that middle-class socialists don't like the poor, they just hate the rich.
Yeah.
And that hatred, I think that hatred gets the upper hand in sociological movements. I think that the best approach to ameliorating inequality is to strengthen the individual. I mean, and that's what I've concentrated on doing. Like, we have this program, the self-authoring suite, and there's a component of that helps people write an autobiography, and another component that helps them write an analysis of their personality, and another component that helps them write out a plan for the future. And we've used that, we've studied the effect of having people write out a detailed plan for their future. And it's a proper plan. It's like, okay, look, you get to have what you want 3 to 5 years down the road. You get to have the friends you want, you get to have the family you want, you get to have the career you want, the education, you get to take care of yourself properly, you get to withstand the temptations of drug and alcohol abuse and other sorts of impulsive...
Oh boy. I think he just put his finger right on the pulse of specific cultural expressions wherein we may find someone who bears a striking resemblance to Russell Brand.
pleasures. You get to make productive and meaningful use of your time. Okay, what does that look like for
5 free, everybody. Ready? 5 free.
you? Write it out. What does it look like? Just, you need a vision.
He's got himself covered in tattoos.
And then you need another vision of how terrible things could be if you let all your bad habits get the upper hand. And we've had people do that in an experimental situation, and mostly they were college students. And the consequences of that, there were 2 consequences. One was general, which was that university students were...
One was general, meaning a mean. He draws a mean line when he does that. Calling that general, I don't know. Don't know about that. To say that the mean line is what's generally true? Okay.
30% more likely to stay in university and got grades that were about 25% better. This is a
Generally true for the context of that mean only.
walloping effect. But even more interestingly, and this is the coolest thing I think that we ever discovered as in our psychological research, we did this research in Holland at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, at the Rotterdam School of Management, and we ran business students through the Future Authoring program for multiple years, so several thousands of them. And we stratified them by gender and ethnicity. A pretty rough cut. Men, women, and then Dutch nationals and non-Western ethnic minorities. Okay, and so the performance was like this. The Dutch women were at the top, then the Dutch
Non-Western ethnic minority.
men, then the non-Western ethnic minority women, then the non-Western ethnic minority men. and they were behind the Dutch women they showed about an 80% decrement in performance. Really quite catastrophic. 2 years after they did the future authoring program, they were ahead of the Dutch women. It just blew us away because it was a perfect indication of the fact that you can use a psychological intervention to ameliorate what looks like a sociological problem. And so I think I think the right solution, and this is what I've been saying over and over in my lectures and in this book.
The right solution is the incorrect solution. Funny, but I do believe it's possible for all of the things that I disagree with when I listen to Jordan Peterson, that he is correct about this. And that because he offers a solution which actually works, that's a perfect reason why the neo groups, which see beyond the whole conservative liberal labels, the globalists, if you will, that's why they don't like listening to something which fixes the problem. It's like saying he's going to build a light bulb now which never burns out. Who needs such a light bulb?
12 Rules for Life. And this is why I think it's become so popular. I said, look, you're right. You were right. You said earlier in the last question, well, you can't ignore the group classification problem. You know, there's a black experience, there's a Latino experience, there's a female experience. It's like, yeah, that's true.
You can ignore, if we're going to talk any kind of universal transcendent truth, you can ignore. But I will grant you that it is frequently necessary to take into account the thing which has been making the measurements. Otherwise, you've no appreciation for what kind of margins of error might be involved, what was supposedly gospel truth. That's what I think.
But you have to decide what level of analysis you're going to make primary. And I think the primary level of analysis is the individual and the psychological, rather than the group and the sociological. And I think if you put the individual level first, and then you alluded to that, because it was like an intuition that you were bringing forward, which was your intuition has been that the right level of progress is made at the level of the individual. And I think that's true.
I feel that's the only level where I have personal authority.
Is that the level of the individual? You have to make your own decisions, but he makes his individual decisions when he's in the middle of a group, a cult, if you will, a culture, a group of people.
Well, right. And also personal responsibility. Because here's the thing, here's the rule. How about this?
It's funny because that's part of the reason why he's part of this group, because, it's kind of hard when you're, people have an idea, there's stigma associated with certain decisions, personal responsibility-wise.
Don't recommend any changes that you wouldn't suffer for if they failed. How's that? And that's the problem with large-scale political action. It's like, well, here's how we should change things. It's like, well, they changed them. It's, well, it fails. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't hurt me. I'm not involved in it. It's like, you should be careful when you try to change things to make sure you suffer for your own stupidity.
Of course, Jordan, but that also plays into the hands of conservatism, because...
Conservatism. Everything's staying the same, or people not having to give up what they've unequally earned from the 33.
You said that left-wing change tends to be sort of potentially destructive.
Yep.
These are
not just left-wing change.
Yes,
there's
exactly.
right-wing radicals too.
And even and also there is sort of conventional politics and the ecological.
Right-wing radicals are not only Nazis and people who wear uniforms of the military type. They're also frequently religious. They're part of the right. Thank you very much. People who consider themselves righteous are on the right. They're conservatives. That's part of their, if you want to call it something, that's their nature. It's kind of the thing which distinguishes them ideologically.
Logical
Phenomenologically speaking, I mean.
Impact that it has, the inequality, which whilst you continue to say that the problem of inequality is an anthropological, biological, cosmological, physical problem.
It's a really deep problem. It's
a
real
deep problem.
problem.
And for me, whenever you get near a problem that has that level of profundity or ubiquity, the solution can only be spiritual. We have...
What? Must be spiritual, this deep problem. How do we go from a deep problem to a transcendent, all-encompassing reality? Don't get that. True, it's kind of quantum in its way. It spreads from very specific to very, very big and broad and spread out. But he hasn't been the one to demonstrate why that should be so. He's relying on everyone else who's ever told him exactly what to say, so we keep the sheep in the pens, inside of the fences, bickering over what the categories of sheep are.
Access the transcendent in some way to look for solutions. And although that sounds a little airy-fairy.
So why do you believe that? Why do you believe that?
You don't believe anything, Jordan. He only says it for the fucking lulls.
I mean,
it's a joke, boy. It's a joke.
I'm not disputing that, but you obviously believe that.
I do believe this.
What drove you to that conclusion?
I've been driven to this conclusion by the experience.
I lost my driver's license after the last. Anyway, I've only got a group 2 times a week.
Experiences of personal failure and personal limitation, by the failure of individuation, by the
If it ever really goes bad for this guy, he'll switch his sex. He'll become a woman.
failure of my own grandiosity, the failure of my own ego, the failure
And I have a whole bunch of people saying, yeah, he talked about this for years.
of fame and power and money and sex and drugs, the inability of them to reach me in the belly of the beast, deep, deep, deep down where the Leviathan is. These
The Leviathan is deep down in his belly. Oh, okay. It was born there.
cures,
He fed to him on a silver spoon.
this alchemy was redundant. And what I have realized, I think the spiritual journey for me, the hero's journey, and I'm using reference points in which you are an expert and a professor, is that the death of the small s self and the realization of the capital S self means become a servant of good. Use your abilities.
Yeah, see, you must become a servant. The word serf is got the same word as servant, and it also shares the same meanings as slave. Now, it's okay to partially enslave yourself to the needs of society. Generally, this is the understanding. You're not really a slave if there is no direct master. If the only thing you're mastering is your own self, then in providing service, there may actually be some enjoyment. I mean, allow me to be honest and blunt. I don't like hearing those words, allow me to be honest, but allow me to be blunt. I enjoy providing some services absolutely free of charge. Absolutely. It doesn't bother me. It makes me happier to do something in service. I can understand that. But it doesn't mean that I want to purpose my entire being around this concept of as they're presenting it, because I frequently see how that ends up in some pretty bad ends too.
To generate the maximum amount of love, the maximum amount of kindness and compassion, and to be alert to where I can be of most use. Now, for me, that can be incredibly limited because I'm still a deeply egotistical, narcissistic, flawed, failing individual. But what my focus is, what my intention is, what I'm trying...
Funny what he determines is failed and flawed, egotistical, narcissistic. Is that generally true for everybody, or is this only him he's speaking for? Projection? Maybe.
To learn to become, in this journey of self-realization, is a compassionate and loving man. And
But you also said, you added something to that too, though. Well, you added useful to that.
Yeah, useful.
You're right.
Not
well,
useful,
you're
you're finished.
Well, that's it. So the best definition of Christian compassion that I ever read was useful and generous. Right. Useful and generous. Right. And so I would say the conservatives
That's the Christian ideal, to be useful and generous. Curious.
conservatives promote the useful end of the distribution, and the liberals promote the generous end. And those things need to be brought together.
And I would say...
Jeremy Bentham was a conservative. Utility.
And given that you yourself have said the problem, for example, of hierarchies exists on a far broader spectrum than the political, that the narrow, like when you were saying, like on the whole, left-wing Democrat or Republican governments or left-wing, right-wing government.
Democrat, Republican. American terms.
Have produced a similar
About
amount
the same
of
amount of inequality.
For
It's
me,
pretty
that's
sad. I'm not happy about this.
And
It's
it
a
also
sad thing.
doesn't it suggest also, Jordan, that the range of solution that we're being offered is too limited.
Right. Yes, I don't think it suggests that. I think it indicates that.
Directly indicates
Yes,
that.
and this is why I think that the problem of inequality has to be taken with more seriousness than it's being taken.
And the role of the individual, and obviously you would focus on this as a clinical psychologist, is paramount because I kind of believe when I think about sort of fluctuating, vivid, grotesque right-wing phenomena such as Donald Trump, I don't blame people.
Oh, man. Funny. He calls Donald Trump a right-winger when Trump was always a Democrat. Was always a business Democrat. Only thing makes him a right-winger, then, is his business background, which really could be from either side. There's no wing to that at all. Man, talk
People
about...
vote for Donald Trump. I understand why people feel furious. I understand the emotion of anger and rage.
No,
and
you
I
don't.
suspect that all...
Understands it. He understands these feelings of rage and no. What does he understand? That the media has been frothing them all up, like, playing them like the proverbial fiddles, as if they were hanging from trees in a William Blake inscription, like an engraving. Is that right? Is that right? How they've been played like fiddles? Is that what you're talking about, Brand?
All that plays out in the zoetrope of the material realm is a
Yeah.
reflection of the activity in the psyche, activity in the emotion. How could it be otherwise, except for, of course, you say it occurs in lobsters and nature, so that suggests it's even more profound, deeper, more essential than that.
That the psyche is deeper than just human.
Right, the psyche is all, the universal conscious and unconscious mind. So
Oh, my. Here you go, right back to the transcendent bullshit. Here we go, right back to the apologetics pretending to be respectable.
I suppose what I'm thinking is how can
I suppose you're not thinking at all. I suppose you're just running your mouth off. I suppose like Fleet Street.
What my interest is how can
Well,
I
let me ask you.
manifest
Well,
benevolence?
let me ask you a question.
Go on.
What do you think that you've done in the last year that's good?
They are mostly small things.
Okay, well,
acts of kindness.
Well,
and
you have a daughter. You have a good relationship with her, so that seems to be a good thing.
that's been beautiful. That's been sort of, in fact, that is hugely significant. My newfound ability to live what one might refer to as an ordinary domestic life, my willingness to let go of other people's perception of me, these things have all been hugely significant. And my sort of, I would say, my dedication to sort of self.
He's been told by his accountant that there'll be no more rough spending sprees, otherwise your child's going to starve, Mr. Brand. Don't know if you realize this, Mr. Brand, but there's an interest rate, Mr. Brand. And now your brand, Mr. Brand, is our brand, Mr. Brand. Thank you, Mr. Brand.
Improvement in areas that could still be regarded as selfish is one thing, still an improvement to sort of take exercise to look after myself. I'm like drug and alcohol free for like 15 years, and it's at this point that the epiphanies are beginning to sort of coalesce. The things that I feel are perhaps most important is to let go of
He used his chip there.
self-centeredness when I conduct myself and when I'm not continually thinking what can I get, when I don't look at the outside world as a resource, when I don't think what can that person give me, what can they give me, when I think instead.
Well, I have a chapter on that in 12 Rules for Life, right? It says, do what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
12 rules for life.
And to view
He doesn't. He's like, I've already got 10 rules, I don't need another 12.
the world as
10 plus 12 is 22, it's not 33.
a place of resources that can be delivered to you. It's in some sense.
22 and 33, however, do have a same and similar harmonic, if you will, which is the numbers 11 as in both of them.
It's to be expedient, is to take the short-term, it's to take the approach of short-term gratification, something like that.
Yes.
It's self-centered.
It's materialistic too.
Well, it is materialistic, but it's not optimal, and it's not wise. And the reason
It can potentially be not optimal and wise if you continually gluttonize everything you ever see that can possibly be edible and you just shove it in your face because there's no stopping you. That could be detrimental to your existence. Who actually gets in that position, though?
for that is that it actually turns.
I mean, say people are aware of their own bodies. They are aware when they're eating. You know, I don't really need to eat anymore here.
So, like, if we're gonna have if we had a continuing relationship, I would want to try to do a little bit more for you than you do for me. And I could do that even purely selfishly, say, because if I did a little bit more for you than you did for me, you would want to keep interacting with me.
How does that? All right, so because me and you, I think, get on relatively easy. We've found a frequency to communicate on. But say
He submitted to you as the interviewer, Mr. Brand. Well, why don't we admit to what the frequency is here? Your frequency is I'm in control. This is my camera. This is my show. If I don't like what you say, you'll never get on the air. Something like that, right?
someone like the woman.
We're both high in openness.
High in openness is a good service. Now, what about the woman on Channel 4 News who seemed more agitated and stuff? Like,
This is why this is potentially interesting to me, because the woman on Channel 4 News is one of the reasons why I can't currently live stream.
Like, me...
Well, we were actually having a conversation. We're trying to have a conversation that's oriented towards discovering something.
And you think she had a sort of a series of linear
She was trying to
mots and
prove something.
epithets, and she was just dropping them regardless of what came
Oh,
back?
definitely.
Well, you know, I do believe Mr. Brand may have engaged in the same bullshit when he was reading off a prepared statement at the beginning that would have been printed, let alone typed.
That's exactly what happened, except once. There was once where,
when you're being mean to me, and she was a bit like confounded.
Yeah. Well, when I complimented her on her ability to put people on the spot, when she said that that was the wrong thing to do. You know,
Yes. Now, you're an academic, you're a clinical psychologist, but in this moment, do you not feel, and like it's a question you could easily pose to me, feel like, right, I just want this, like that's the person that's been in front of you, that's the world in that moment. I don't think you were particularly hostile to that person, may I say, but like, do you not feel like in that moment, it would be of value and of service to nurture that person? You know,
yes. Well, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, very smart friend of mine. His name is Wayne Moretsky. He's quite the character, Wayne. But he watched, and I've had people watch what I've been doing for the last 18 months. Lots of people, and they report on what they think about what I'm doing. And so I asked Wayne about the interview, and you know, he was happy about the fact that I conducted myself with a certain amount of calm and detachment. But he did say something very interesting. There was the kind of the culmination of that interview was where Kathy was challenging me about my right to say things that might offend someone. And I said, essentially, look, you've based your whole career and this interview on that right. You know, and congratulations to you. That's what you should be doing. And then she was taken aback by that. And I said, gotcha. And she was sort of flustered, and she said, well, yeah, you did. And Wayne said, you know, you could have, instead of saying gotcha at that point, you could have taken the opportunity there to expand on that.
Here's the chess game, which is human semantic communication. The communication of the ideas through the use of words, which are themselves, the words are not the same as the ideas in our head. Our impression that we've got, the phenomenology, if you will, exists inside the brain, so inside the consciousness. And then there's the real thing which exists in the material world, which, you know, dirty, following, evil, materialistic world. Bullshit. This material thing is more important in my view than this idea I have of this material thing, this other person. Which is why it's important to remember not to dehumanize others. Because it's very easy to put some understanding upon this thing up here, which has nothing to do at all with the reality, and call it a fucking joke. Brand is very adept in this semantic game. So is Peterson, but they play for different teams and in different sports entirely.
That opening, and to try to have a genuine conversation.
Yeah, I'd like to chastise you, along with Wayne, for not doing that Christian thing.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Okay, so I thought, and
Fuck off, Brand. Fuck off, Brand. There's no reason for him to follow through on his Christian thing. And why are you, Mr. Pope, for understanding or for correcting him? You're playing Jesus now, are you, Brand? You're playing Jesus to him and calling him out on his inability to do the Christian thing and be nice? Because Jesus didn't say bring a sword. Because Jesus didn't say bring a sword. Did he? He didn't say that, Brand. He didn't say that, not in the Gospel of John either.
I thought about that a lot. I thought, well, I think there were limitations in the format. Like by that time, we were about 25 minutes into the interview, you know, so it was coming close to an end. And you know, sometimes being funny, because I think it was reasonably funny, it was reasonably witty. Sometimes that's okay too. Well, that's why comedians are.
And actually wins a lot of arguments.
Say funny things, but
this just in.
Yeah, well, right. Well, hopefully they do, and hopefully they can get away with it, right? And I think that's.
So he's getting played a second time here. Why is Brand pretending not to know how comedy works, or how saying what's funny because it's true? It doesn't work, because you know Simpsons didn't make years of hay off of that.
That's often an extremely effective conversational maneuver.
Because actually, as a matter of fact, you said something about comedy. This is another thing. I'm just throwing a few things at you now because, look, you know, the reason I do this is because I started doing a degree at a university called SOAS called Religion in Global Politics, and one of the main things they taught me there, or one of the things I've intrigued me, is the first thing they show you is this bit of Borgia, this bit of literature by Borgia, where it's some story, I can't remember it, called the Chinese Emperor's System of Taxonomy, where he and the story's about.
Yes.
I love that gear.
Yes.
And and it's sort of and part of the courses they talk about who gets to determine what words like natural or power or who.
You know, we're talking specifically about how semantic communication works.
Gets to determine how those terms are allocated. I dig that. Who gets to determine what's deemed religious, what's
that's
deemed
why
political.
I objected to Bill C-16, because I wasn't going to let the radical leftists decide the linguistic playing ground. And that's what they were trying to do. You see, their rationale was, we're on the side of transgender people. I thought, no, you're not. You're trying to control the linguistic territory.
In a sense, like this is where this conversation is it parallels the conversation I had with Sam Harris. Because with Sam Harris, what I found myself saying is that why are you so worried about this one particular issue of zealousness or extremism?
You don't want to call it what it is either, which is right wing. It's a specific form of right wing. Not just extremism, not just zealousness. It's the natural consequence, or what some on the left, people like Sargon, call the purity spiral. It's what happens when this ideal becomes more and more dogmatically insisted upon.
When it seems that power is actually situated elsewhere.
Mr. making signs with his fingers here.
That, you know, and whilst, you know, in that instance, I suppose because that was the instance.
Power is somewhere out there because, you know, people are also out there and they're not just up here in your little head.
That came your way, you as you term it, the radical left, you know, imposition of certain rules around language that you objected to.
Yeah, well, that was the reason for me. Plus the fact that...
But broadly speaking, but you have also continued to furrow or plough that furrow, haven't you? You have continued down a sort of a line that seems like teleologically sensible with what happened there. Like it continues to...
Teleology, phenomenology. Do you know who else uses terms like this? Richard fucking Spencer. That's who. This guy argues a lot like Richard Spencer. Funny. Who'd have thunk that one?
Like, you know, I know what you're saying. Like, I agreed with your analysis of the word provocateur. If you don't, you know, a person is provoked. If they're not provoked, you're not a provocateur. So it's a difficult.
We say provocateur when we're being all high and mighty and elegant, but when we want a person to be tired and feathered, we say troll. And we try to reduce them to, you know, a troll of some kind. Whatever troll means. Troll term that comes from fantasy writing. Doesn't exist. It's dehumanizing to refer to the troll, but it is not dehumanizing to refer to the provocateur who might actually know what they're fucking doing.
A label to apply to anybody, but it seems to me that, you know, when people say, you know, young males are particularly sort of attracted to your work, I do see that.
You know what I see? I see people over focusing or intentionally choosing to focus on specific things, like, oh, you know, it's a lot of young males. If you go to Reddit, it's a lot of young people, it's a lot of pre-adolescents.
This is a time where males need guidance and like
bad word. Don't want to say it out loud. Males.
There isn't the kind of elders, customs, initiations, routes to masculinity are in short supply. I can see that there's a real value in that.
I should just get myself a tattoo of a blindfold right across my fucking eyes.
that. But I also feel that in this time of social contention, identity politics being part of it.
So he's been going on all of the right wing things. He's talked teleology, he's talked phenomenology, and he just talked identity.
And conflict, that ideas that promote unity and
Fascism.
the immolation of those kind of boundaries, it feels to me would be particularly and especially valuable. Do you know?
Well, again, but I think the right way to do that is to concentrate on the individual. And so
The right way to avoid the problems of that is to concentrate on the individual, which is how you avoid fascism. That's part of the reason why I like Discordianism as an organizing principle. For self, not for others. And the first rule of Discordianism, which I've expounded a million times on this channel, having read it and considered it, thrown it away, picked it up, hit it with a hammer a few times and said, now it'll work. It is we should stick apart. Discordians must stick apart. It's not dogma, it's katma, a relative meta-belief, which is not expected to be adhered to. Not always, but generally, if we stick apart, we should be able to avoid the worst of any fascistic tendency which comes from any bad totalitarian or collective tendency which comes from this group identity, Discordian. That's the proof.
let me answer that in two ways. The first issue is that it isn't self-evident that the reason that what I've been talking about has been attractive to young men, that might be...
It is not self-evident.
Like a fluke. And it might be a fluke because almost everybody who watches YouTube is male.
It might also be that they're looking to find that. It's a predetermined fluke, as it were.
Male.
Yeah.
So, like, if I look at my YouTube audience, it's 80% male. But that's true of YouTube audiences in general.
In general.
So it's just a typical YouTube audience.
Right.
Typical.
And so what's
Is
happening?
that your intuition?
Well,
I
I think it's
there
more
is something
complicated.
about
Jesus
I think
Christ,
it's more
man, let him
complicated
answer.
than that. But I do know that since my book has come out, I've been watching the demographics
The numbers.
of my public audience.
Fair.
That more and more and more women are coming out. So it's now to about 65-35 from 80-20. And more older people are coming out too. So I think a fair bit of it was a consequence of the fact that most of my exposure and
Was coming through the YouTube algorithm, which pushed him towards a lot of young adolescent males. Wow. Nothing eerie or, untoward there, YouTube. Making sure that anyone you don't really want to listen to is only listened to by young adolescent males, isn't it?
was to the YouTube.
Or young people, anyone who's younger than the age of 19. Oh, and make sure that Jordan Peterson videos are for those people.
Which happens to be mostly men. Now, I do also think that there is a particular crisis with regards to what might be described as proper pathways to masculinity. I also think that's at play. So I think there's two factors. But I don't think...
Look at his bristling. You can almost see it occurring. I don't think my wife will like this.
And Kathy Newman kind of went after me about this. She said, well, if you're directing your message towards young men, which I wasn't, but assuming that's the case,
People, man.
isn't that divisive? And I would say, well, I don't think it is divisive because, first of all, the masculine in women also needs to be developed. It's very, very important. And the people who are...
It's a Jungian kind of an interpretation as well, that the males would have a feminine part, like an anima, and an animus is their masculine part. The sense of self, the spiritual self.
Are the enemies of the masculine in men are also the enemies of the masculine in women. So if you overprotect your sons, let's say, you overprotect them in part and weaken them because you're afraid of their masculine energy, you're going to do exactly the same thing to your daughters. So a female child would similarly be disempowered. Oh, definitely, because the thing is, and this is another thing, is that I am a psychometrician. That's technically my job.
I've had this discussion online too. I'm not a psychometrician, and I'm not a psychiatrist, nor am I a psychologist, nor have I any kind of degree from a university whatsoever. Although I did spend some years in university working toward a degree. Now, the degree that I was interested in was in the arts, not in the sciences. Although I've got a scientific bent, so I've got some instruction in the scientific method, but it comes from my exposure to the scientific method during high school years, which included some encouragement to, do things with experimental data, to try things out and to test hypotheses. So it's not without any. I can at least recognize that I'm a different bird than Peterson here. What was I thinking about saying before I let him go back to talk? I don't know. Maybe I should just let him talk.
And we study the measurement. Well, and like it's a truism of psychometrics that men and women are more the same than they are different. It's funny because I've been sort of positioned as someone who is constantly on about the differences between men and women. But men and women are more the same than they are different.
Yes.
And what that means is that the development of masculinity in women.
Oh, right. What was I starting to say? Online, I've had the chance to make the argument, not in a video, but in text comment normally. Talking either on a comment form or in a message board or in a chat room. I've often reflected that you can see a sense of gender, the way that gender doesn't matter to a speaker if you observe languages which also observe gender. French, for example, has an idea for masculine words and feminine words. So a cat is always feminine, whereas the hat is always masculine. And a feminine person who has a cat, or a masculine person who has a cat, would refer to the thing, the cat, with the cultural identification of what that gender is, this thing, which is weird. It is very clearly constructed in some senses because it's lended out. It's lended wholesale, like a fetish, like a stamp. It's put on like something which is created to represent.
Perhaps it's not as important as the development of masculinity in men, but it's damn important. It's like it's a close second. And so if people are pushing down masculinity as a virtuous mode of being, then it has a detrimental effect on both sexes.
Everybody, I agree with this. But you would say that determinally and biologically that there is a thing that is masculinity, and that thing, masculinity, is present in both females and males.
Definitely.
But I think again one of the challenges that this argument appears to be built around is a sort of hierarchy around those traits. Masculinity being synonymous, for example, with power. Oh, here's the thing I wanted to bloody ask you. Check this out, because it was a bit. I said it on a YouTube video on my own the other day, and I thought, wonder if this stands up to scrutiny. Let's give it a bit. Check this. I said, like, in Sweden, they're banning sexually provocative advertising. It's the kind of thing you hear a lot about, like the objectification of women. And I said, of course, I support that because as a male being subjected to lots of sexualized images of women has, to a degree, affected, particularly when I was younger,
Well, the logical conclusion of that is pornography, right?
Yes.
And that doesn't really seem to be a good thing.
It doesn't seem to be a good thing, yeah. I don't look at pornography anymore. But pornography, I think, is, very...
Do you believe him? I don't believe him. The way he said that, I don't believe him. Let's listen to that again.
Lots of sexualized images of women has, to a degree, affected, particularly when I was younger,
Well, the logical conclusion of that is pornography, right?
Yes.
And that doesn't really seem to be a good thing.
It doesn't seem to be a good thing, yeah. I don't look at pornography anymore.
Anymore.
But pornography, I think, is, very corrupting, corrosive influence, for me personally. It's not something I want to be involved in.
So he's gonna speak for himself there, but it's gonna be something which a lot of people hear. Okay.
I said this. Check this.
Yep.
I goes, I feel the use of the female in
Looked at the camera that time, yeah.
advertising and commodification in general is the
The use of any person who is sexually attractive to a demographic is exploitative. It doesn't matter what their gender is. It doesn't matter what their sex is. It's sexist insofar it doesn't matter what it is. But it is sexist to use the sex as the thing which is selling. Period. I don't give a damn if it's a male or a female in the ad. If I want to be really prickish about it. In fact, I think the ones which are generally most offensive are the ones which don't focus on the things which we generally focus on. Faces, eyes, hands. When we don't see the faces, when we don't see the eyes, when we don't see the hands, then we really start yelling sexist.
Perverted desire to worship the feminine. The negated and neglected feminine has found its expression through consumerism.
The negated and neglected, because it wasn't Holy Mother Church. It was never called that.
And commerce, because it is not being properly honoured socially. What do you reckon? I made it up.
Full of shit.
I'd have to think about that a long
it
time.
up.
I
would
would
have
too.
to think about that a long time.
It's a good
before I would
idea,
dare
though, isn't it?
answer it? It's
It's a
it's
good
an
idea.
worth thinking about for a while.
It's a bunch of
Like
ideas.
if there are essential, if we have
Glom
essential
together
yearnings,
like a
if
spitball.
we have like like e.g. if the like the in sort of, if in indigenous cultures we would have deities to represent gender or certain energies that are subtler.
Really? You trying to make why don't you go out and study this a little more before you formalize your thought before you ask Jordan Peterson to give you the stamp of approval. The Jordan Peterson stamp of approval, which makes you therefore, you can put a little button on. Oh, Jordan Peterson said this off. These are very good one. I had a tattoo put underneath my 33. Approved by Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson approved.
Than gender. If there is a sense that socially those energies are not being expressed or honoured, as you have implied with male pathways.
That's definitely the case. So one of the things that I've often thought about ideologies is that they're like parasites on religious structures. And if you're thinking that the movement of feminine imagery up into the I've often thought about ideologies is that they're like parasites on religious structures.
Oh, on religious structures. Ideologies are parasites on religious structures. Huh. What religious structures? The structures of the brain or the structures of what?
And if you're thinking
religious structures, the structures of the brain, because you've been made by God, you're therefore his property, then it's a religious structure. No, Peterson. No.
that the movement of feminine imagery up into the consumerist world is an analog, or is at least in part a consequence of not having a.
I think my original contention against what he said actually was, what about Holy Mother Church? Where'd the feminine go? Because it wasn't exalted already? If it's not Holy Mother Church, it's the Holy Mother of God. The next best thing.
Symbolic place where that attraction can be expressed. I think that's probably right. It's like in the United States, is the first family tends to be turned into king and queen.
Why would we need a Holy Mother of God as our sure advocate's advocate, since our advocate's going to be the judge as well? Because that's not, what's the word? Nepotistic.
Yeah.
Because there's no place for that symbolic projection.
Yeah, the template requires it.
Yeah.
And I heard once an analysis of the Soviet Union after the revolution that it mimicked the monarchic tyranny that had preceded it, just in a different format.
To some degree, the culture itself, the society of people, mimicked the things that they'd already been doing. And they just continue to do what they already did. That's what's called I wouldn't call it a peaceful transition of power, but it is at least some form of transition of power which doesn't result in the entirety burning down to the ground.
Right.
And it seemed, that so certain
they
energies.
had their Holy Trinity even, right?
Yes.
Mao, Marx,
Mao?
Lenin.
Amazing.
Or Mao, Marx,
Mao.
Stalin, depending on the Trinity.
Michael Camino joke. Mao!
And some would argue that
Christopher Walken sitting down, getting all googly eyed. Ooh. Mao!
sort of like that Christianity couldn't take hold in Latin America until they embraced the pantheism of the saints and the figure of the Virgin, until that in certain cultures the Virgin had to be elevated because there isn't a place in the Father, Son, Holy Ghost for the divine.
Oh no, because it wasn't already there. This is an idiot. This is an idiot. An idiot jabbering on as if he understands because he's got a university degree now. If he doesn't understand how Catholicism allowed for that place all along, if he doesn't understand that, why it is that the Bible didn't solve anything and that Catholicism solved the problem by replacing, thousands of years ago, by replacing the Bible with the Mother of God, and then allowing the Bible to be studied by the strictly segregated groups. They weren't always strictly segregated. The priests weren't. The priests of the Middle Ages and onward are different than the priests which preceded them, and there were reformations inside the Catholic Church the same as there was a Reformation which caused the Protestants. Two different sets of reformations, different sets of Vatican alterations, for example. Like the Vatican, which occurred in the 1960s.
Feminine.
Yeah, well, that's a Jungian idea.
Vatican Reformation.
That's an original idea of Jung's, is that
Cool.
the Trinity is missing a quartile, and sometimes that's quartile is filled by the figure of the devil, and sometimes it's filled by the figure of the woman. So it's like the houses in Harry Potter, right? There's three good houses in Slytherin.
4.
And it's in the bottom quadrant. It's a reflection of the same kind of Mandela structure.
That's pretty cool.
So it's very cool.
You have to.
It's very cool.
Have a place at the table for the serpent. You have to have a place.
That's what happens in Sleeping Beauty, right? In the Disney movie.
They don't let in that crone.
That's right. They don't invite her to the christening, and so their daughter ends up unconscious. Right? They don't let the terrible mother come to the party, so the daughter ends up unconscious.
In our domestic, normal, everyday, quotidian lives, what is the terrible mother? How does that help us?
Overprotection.
Don't overprotect the baby. Let it fall over a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. You do the least amount.
Why do we allow the government to be acting as mother or father or as parent? When we say the government's going to be our parent, we really want to talk about our mother. We don't want our father necessarily being the parent. When it's the father and we go, oh, fucking paternal, oh, paternalistic, oh, patronage, oh.
Not possible for your children. It's something like that. That's not neglect. It's nothing like that. It's like the old age home adage. You know, look, I've seen this lots of times with parents. It's like maybe you have to get your kid dressed up to go out. Well, it takes a long time if you let your kid do it. You know, it's a lot faster just to do it. It's a lot faster not to have them set the table. It's a lot faster to do things for them. Plus, there's also, and this is part.
Yeah, so there you go. Faster is equated with efficiency, especially if you're a servant.
Part of the devouring mother archetype is like, if you've devoted your life to a child, perhaps more than you should have,
But there's diminishing returns to anything, including faster.
Say, then it's very difficult to let the child go because what's there left for you? And so there's this terrible temptation to play, well, I'll do everything for you, but you never leave me. And then for the child to say, yeah, that's right, that's exactly the right face to make for that. That's a very terrible thing. And you see that again in Disney's Sleeping Beauty, where Maleficent has the heroic prince in the dungeon and is laughing at him. Right? She's not going to let him go until he's ancient. And that's a consequence.
Where else do we see the devouring mother? What are some good cultural examples of?
Peterson is projecting a little bit there. He's thinking to himself, my God, if I don't get out of here soon.
Oh, you see it in Disney movies all the time.
I've always got one.
In the Little Mermaid, Ursula is the devouring mother. The devouring mother shows up all the time. She's the witch. She's the swamp dweller. She's the evil queen in Snow White.
What's the counterpoint? The fairy godmother?
Yeah, fairy godmother's one. Yeah, that's the positive feminine. And that happened, that archetype manifests itself all over the places.
Positive feminine archetypes, or positive feminine presentations in Disney films. Mary Poppins, who's very practically masculine in the way she deals with everybody. To the point of unsentimentality. She allows herself sentimentality in a way that other men would find admirable. They themselves would probably look on another man behaving in the same way. It's allowing a single tear to escape, or practically perfect people never allow sentiment to muddle their thinking.
Well, the fairy godmother's a good one, and you see in Sleeping Beauty, there's three of them, the three little fairies that take care of the princess in the forest. They're the archetype of the positive feminine. So you always see one of the things that distinguishes a religious viewpoint from it.
In The Lion King, it's the bait. In The Lion King, it's the mate for Simba. Pocahontas, well, I guess that stands out for itself. All the colors of the rainbow. Anyway. Any others? Pinocchio doesn't win.
Ideological viewpoint is that there's always a representation of nature or the unknown. Always. You need one. And if
That's
it's a
Holy
religious
Ghost in Christianity, is it? Holy Ghost in Christianity is the unknown?
Well, in Christianity, I'd have to think about that.
My gosh. No, how can you call the ghost the unknown? Unknown to our perception, you know everything because of your connection to the almighty cosmic unity factor. Unit. Bloody unit.
Partly it's the Virgin Mother. It's mostly a positive representation in Christianity. So, and that would be the representation of the benevolence of nature.
The unknown, yeah, the Virgin Mother, yeah, I actually could go along with that. Why? Mary has two feasts. There's the birth feast, but there's also the feast which occurs when she's informed that she's going to have a baby. Do you get what I mean? That's where the unknown comes in.
It's something like that. So that's the unknown. But in a religious representation, you have
thus the miracle in the Virgin. How would she figure out that she's pregnant? All of a sudden she wakes up one morning, she's got morning sickness.
the positive and the negative aspect of the feminine. That's also the unknown. You have the positive and negative aspect of the state. That's the wise king and the devouring king. And you have the positive and negative representation of the individual. And the reason it's religious in some sense, it's hard to explain why in a very short period of time, but a religious viewpoint always gives you a balanced viewpoint. That's what makes
There's nothing balanced, my friend, about something which ends up ultimately unequal. There's nothing balanced about tithing, not only tithing, but usury. Nothing balanced about that at all.
makes it religious. It's like there's a positive element that's intensely positive, but there's the negative counterpart. And there's a positive. So let me give you an example here. I can give you an example of how this plays out archetypally. The frontier myth that settled the West was essentially heroic individual, positive, bringing the benefits of order and culture, positive, to the desolate, barren wastelands of the West.
Yes, nature, which had to be dominated, had to be suppressed or reshaped or reformed into man's stamped image, with boundaries marked out by fences or markers or assay offices. I have no idea.
Okay, so it's positive individual, positive culture, negative nature. Okay, so that's an ideology, but it's a powerful story because it's true. Heroic individual, bearer of culture, barren, desolate wasteland. It's true. But one of the things that eventually generated was a counter narrative, and not because it was only half the story. That counter narrative was the environmental narrative, which was rapacious individual bringing pillaging society into benevolent nature.
And they had to recast the indigenous people that lived on those land masses as savages, not entitled to the same rights as the heroic individual.
Well, and there were actually two
So
competing
the only thing that we're going to talk about with any person who comes from North America is the way that the Aboriginals were treated. Fair enough point, I suppose, but you're a great one to talk about it. We didn't talk about the word imperialism through the entirety of this. It was only ever capitalism. Fucking capitalism, in it. It's fucking capitalism. Misters, how many of his tattoos do you think he purchased? And do you think he would have had any of these tattoos had he lived in a communist society? Do you think he would have gotten all of those tattoos merely because he was a really good comedian and not because he had to spend more of his really good comedian cash, which he would have gotten in the communist society? It wouldn't have cost him more, I mean to say, if he'd been in communism to get those tattoos than it would in the capitalist society? Answer that one, would you please, Mr. Brand. With that, I'm going to leave this video off. That's 3 parts, 3 hours for 1 hour and a half. That's pretty good, I think. If you got any comments to add, put them below. Thanks for watching.